Okay, so it's not really my friend Dahmer, it's actually more like guy that I bumped into a few times Dahmer. Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written and illustrated by Derf, Backderf, My Friend Dahmer is an original graphic novel that was first published by Abrams Comics Arts in 2012. And do you ever wonder what happened to the weird kid back in high school? For Derf and his friends, that guy was Jeffery Dahmer, who would go on to be one of the most horrific serial killers in human history. But when looking back at his school years, were there clues all along? Was he a genuine person before he'd go on to commit all these crimes? And could someone have stepped in and helped before any of these murders ever took place? The art's really quirky. It's not a style that I'd usually gravitate towards with that 2D almost comic strip style look to it, but I did really enjoy it here. Given the subject matter, I liked that it looked unrealistic and that it juxtaposed against the fact that you're being told a story about Jeffrey Dahmer. And the layout of the text was great as well. Sometimes it would appear on the walls, speech bubbles might change, it would get bigger if someone shouted, and it'd realistically get blocked off if somebody was talking over somebody else. Another element of the text and the art that I liked was the onomatopoeia. It helped add to that cartoony feel and it helped me immerse into this world further, and it was just a really nice touch. What was also great was the art's ability to carry the story forward. This was clear from the opening pages, just seeing Dahmer walking and it building tension and suspense by saying nothing and just following him from this interesting perspective was just a great way of opening this book. And it would allow you to wonder what's going on more than being told what was happening. And because of that cartoony aspect, the expressions and the mannerisms were so exaggerated to a point where it felt like they couldn't be done by a real human. And I don't know if that was done to help us detach from who we know Jeffrey Dahmer to be, or to make him seem like someone so odd that it's hard for us to believe that he could possibly exist. I also loved the look of each character. It reminded me a lot of Black Hole, at least what I saw of it from university, until I decided that I wasn't going to read it but would still do an essay on it anyway. But I've already done a video where I've spoke about that, so just make sure you check that one out. But everyone in this would have a unique characteristic so that you could recognise them when they'd come back into the page, but all the students would still look the same except for Dahmer. And I don't really know how he managed to do that, but it was impressive. All the students just looked old as well, which is something that you always notice in documentaries, so I don't know if that was on purpose. And despite the style being simplistic on the surface, it's still always packed out the panel. The detail that I spoke about in the characters extended to the setting and the scenery, and I just love the use of black and white here. I think it would have lost a lot of its identity if it had have gone in colour. And it's crazy because people always seem to lump black and white comics together, but when I compare this to something like The Walking Dead, and when I reviewed that last year, there is absolutely no comparison in these two books. And the more I read of them, the more I enjoy their style, so who knows, maybe it's finally time that I go back and check out From Hell again. Maybe I am being polite though, because like I said, this isn't a style that I'd usually go for. I also think this isn't something that would be for everyone, and I actually think it'd be more accessible to somebody who doesn't read comics than to somebody who only reads Marvel and DC. If you were looking for your first comic that wasn't from those two companies, I don't think that this would be the best one for you. There still might be something that you like. Obviously art's subjective and everybody's got the different tastes, so would recommend checking this out for yourself first, and it is getting an expanded edition next year. But if you did want to pick up any comics, you can get them from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. Jumping into the story now, in the context of when you read this book is probably key to your enjoyment of it. I can only speak on my experience when I first read it this year after I'd just watched the Netflix show, which yeah, is also kind of one of the reasons why I'm doing this video. And I don't feel like I learned much new about Jeffrey Dahmer. And let's just be honest, that's the reason why we're reading this. As nice of a guy as Derf and his friends might be, and I hope that they go on to have a good life, they aren't the reason why anybody picks up this book. And don't get me wrong, I know it might have been a different landscape when this first came out and there wasn't a Netflix show and maybe there hadn't been as many documentaries about him. And this is quite an acclaimed book. I know it won quite a couple of awards, and at the same time everybody should know by now that I am a dumb reader, but I do have to be honest about it, and that's my main takeaway when I finish this book. Don't get me wrong, it's still interesting having this narrator who knew Dahmer and grew up with him, so I feel bad using this as a point of criticism, but there might be people who are watching this video who want to know if they should jump into this after watching the Netflix show, and I honestly can't really recommend it from that perspective. That's not me saying that this is bad or it's a waste of time, because one massive advantage of this story is that it's a very quick read. It doesn't waste your time. I managed to polish this entire thing off whilst I was doing cardio, and it kept me attention throughout. Don't get me wrong though, it doesn't mean it's the same as being unable to put it down. But what is great about this book is that it doesn't shy away from the truth. There's some points where it feels like it's being too honest, almost to the detriment of Derf himself. Don't get me wrong, that might be because there were so few interactions between Derf and Dahmer that he might have had to include absolutely everything in here just so he could pad it out, but still I have to give him some respect for including that scene where he dressed up as Hitler. That just strikes me as the kind of thing that you'd want to distance yourself from. We did highlight that there's this kind of bizarre sense of humour throughout this book, and I often found myself smirking or chuckling throughout it and then feeling guilty because of it. Even the final scene made me smirk when the news finally breaks about Dahmer and Jeff isn't even his first guess on who he thought might have become a serial killer from his school. And it's just interesting how this book does toy with emotions and expectations and preconceived notions, which I feel makes the whole story more sinister. And when you've got such an easy target like Dahmer, it would have been very easy for this entire book to just be going on about how creepy he is. But Derf did take the time to try and highlight how he did try to fit in, especially with his class clown role, and also how he tried to hide his drinking. Although it's not a revelation, Dahmer's alcoholism is probably the most engaging thing for me throughout this book, especially when teachers were finding out and he was getting punished but it still didn't deter him, along with the fact that the amount that he was drinking increased throughout the book, which I thought was a really nice touch. And that nuance and subtlety were key in this story, and it hit the nail on the head every time. Pretty much all of this book takes place during his school years, and there's very little about what happened after. This is more about the red flags and the aspects that made Dahmer who he was, and just how easily everybody brushed them under the rug. And what's interesting is that despite all the experiments he did and his odd behaviour, people still couldn't believe that he would become a serial killer. Because when you're growing up, it feels impossible that someone like that could exist. So it's great from that perspective, but don't expect this to really explore much when it comes to all of his crimes. And that's an element of this book that I still haven't really decided on, because it goes straight from the time when high school's ending and everybody's leaving for college to the day when the news breaks about Dahmer. Sure, it's based on Derf's real life, so maybe he didn't focus that much on Jeff once he'd left school, but I do feel like this book let itself down on the back end. There's some reflection that Derf has about the guy that he knew versus the guy that Dahmer actually was, but it just ends very abruptly and at a point where the story could become much more interesting. The final scene with Dahmer isn't even with Derf, it's with one of the other students. And I appreciate its honesty, but that's one of my biggest problems with this book. There could have been much more meaning and tension if Derf was more involved with the stories that he was telling. The building up to the shopping centre freak out and also the Jeffery Dahmer fan club was interesting, but there just wasn't enough of that, and it becomes more of a collection of anecdotes rather than something that's got an engaging narrative throughout it. It still has the clues and foreshadowing that Dahmer would become the guy that we know he goes on to be, but there's just not really much more than that, and I just feel like it's solely relying on the name recognition to get you to buy it. So yeah, my main problem with it is that it feels like this is being written by somebody that didn't actually have that much to do with Dahmer. And it's a shame too, because there were some great storytelling aspects and I like the way they built tension, but when it comes to a plot with substance, it just falls really short. Especially in a world now when the Netflix show does exist, I can't really see much reason to revisit this, except if you wanted this unique style or something that was set during this time period. Because after reading this, I can say that this isn't really My Friend Dahmer, but it's more guy that was in my class and I talked to a few times and actually kind of bullied Dahmer. But that's not as catchy of a title and it's not going to sell as many books. Let's just be honest. And who knows, maybe if I didn't take the title so literally, I might have enjoyed this more. To play devil's advocate, some of the other characters were really quirky and I liked how all of the teachers reminded me of somebody that I knew growing up. And I liked that this was a coming of age story so that it still had something to offer when Dahmer wasn't there. And like I said, this is such a quick read that maybe it is still worth checking it out if it has been a bit of time since you've watched the series or you haven't read it before. I think that's the main thing that I'm learning from this review, that context is everything. This is my final verdict, and high school is the worst. If you don't get bullied throughout it or rise to the top of the hierarchy early on and get to experience power that you won't feel throughout the rest of your life, then you might have an experience worse than that and end up going to school with a guy who would end up being a serial killer. My Friend Dahmer is a memoir where that third option actually turns out to be a reality. But all in all, I feel like this graphic novel fell short of what this title promised. It's honest and sincere and gives us a unique perspective that we wouldn't really get much insight into, but I don't feel like it gives us a lot with that perspective. What's next? Are we going to get like the person who owned the chippy that was closest to the Moore's murderers? Because there's something about My Friend Dahmer that just feels like a tenuous cash grab that I just couldn't shake that feeling throughout the entire book. And it spends longer telling the stories of other people that don't even involve Derf than the ones that do. So by the end, it just didn't really have the impact that I expected it to have. I do just get the feeling that I would have enjoyed this more if I had read it when it first came out. I know that this is very critically acclaimed and I'm kind of going against the grain by saying this, but at the end of the day, I want to be honest in my reviews. And yeah, it is a very quick read, so you're not even going to waste much of your time if you do get into this and you don't even enjoy it. And I know that there's still going to be people who would enjoy this, and the show probably did take a lot from this book in the first place. And in the mission of saving you time, just know that if you have already watched the Netflix series, you're not going to get much more from My Friend Dahmer. So because of that, I'm going to give it a bang average score of 50%. Woof! So that's the video. I've been a little bit ill whilst filming this, so if I've not really seen myself, just, you know, allow it. But until next time, just make sure that you stay safe. And stay mad, all you dogs. Woof woof! See you in the next video.